So from the perspective of Islamic psychology, what is going on with Muslim families? Why are Muslim couples divorcing? The first thing is that there's a huge dilemma of selection. Now, this might mean that you have a lot of single people in your community, but you may not find anybody who's compatible with you. The other issue is that we have arranged versus choice marriages. Now, arranged versus choice marriages, each of these have their own drawbacks, but the problem is that Muslims tend to believe unfamiliar people can be happily married. Now, Muslims are dating, unfortunately, to solve this misunderstanding, and some families on the other side, they will force marriages and disregard the rights and the Sharia altogether. So the dilemma here is generally of choice, and there has to be more done in our communities to make sure that young people can get married and find somebody who is familiar enough, has enough in common with them, so that they can have successful marriages. Now I'm going to begin a series of videos about marriage couples therapy. It's very triggering for me, but I'm going to get through it, inshallah. The first is TBCT, which is Traditional Behavioral Couple Therapy. This is the most widely studied approach for treating marital distress. It's an efficacious and specific intervention. So there are limitations to it, which are the clinical significance and the durability of these solutions, which is why IBCT, Integrative Behavioral Couple Therapy, has been developed. This, rather than helping the partners change, this therapy encourages couples to accept shortcomings, take the good and leave the bad type of thing, utilizing the unsolvable problems as vehicles for gaining closeness, acceptance as a viable alternative. There are problems in every relationship, impervious to change. So these are the two main couples therapy interventions. So what's the goal of Islamic counseling when we're dealing with marriage issues? The goal is the same as it is with individuals, to encourage the person to enact their taqwa of Allah, to bring in this relationship with Allah, not fatwas and not a whole bunch of advice that's going to guilt trip and make people feel bad about themselves, but just encouraging the people towards taqwa. And of course, there's two people, and that relationship between those two people can bring those people to the Jannah, but not in a way where one is going to Jannah and the other one may go to the hellfire due to their oppression. You are supposed to worship Allah as though you see Him. And so we encourage the couples, when we do counseling, to behave towards each other as if Allah is observing every second of their marriage relationship. And that is conducive to practicing the Quran and the Sunnah. So this is the base advice, and this is where the foundation is of Islamic counseling for marriage. One of the things that my psychology professor really focused a lot on, and alhamdulillah, he was able to establish the Khalil Center on, is collaborative care when dealing with mental health issues, especially with marriage. So the deen can be used to remove defective cognition. So if people are having some expectations that are incorrect, the deen can come in and cleanse those. Actual Islamic roles, not cultural ones. So people will argue your advice if it goes against their nafs. They're going to argue with you unless you are a respected teacher. And they will argue with you because, resistance just comes from their unwillingness to change. So this is when we defer to scholars. You can discuss what the husband and wife think about an issue, but then you bring in an Islamic scholar for a final word. So this is how the deen can be used to remove defective cognitions and bring people back to the Quran and Sunnah at the same time. Many times when Muslim therapists are dealing with couples, they have to deal with Islamic ethics. And this is to integrate with the therapy, just like in all Islamic therapy, to integrate it into a religious framework. So this may mean bringing in a scholar to speak on psychoanalytical education, or discussing the rights and the responsibilities of husband and wife, and how the husband and how the wife look at those responsibilities and how their relationship actually fits in with these parameters. What are those expectations that the people have when they're in their marriage, whether they are learned or whether they're expecting them at a later time? What is each of them doing? What are they individually doing to contribute to the marriage and fit into those rights and responsibilities? There's a limitation for Muslims in counseling because sometimes their issues are not addressed from an Islamic framework, but we have to bring the Islam into it in order to be successful. As marriage counselors, sometimes people will fall into the trap especially amongst Muslims, to go, right or wrong, that this one is right and that one is wrong, especially when it seems to be a religious problem on the outset. For example, a wife not obeying her husband. So if a couple comes in to counseling and they claim, okay, my wife isn't obeying me, and the wife says, I can't, we don't come with the advice, don't disobey your husband. We don't come with this advice. We understand the core definition of obedience to the husband. It's an Islamic right of his. But what's the issue of why she can't obey? What is the issue where she can't actually obey? There could be a lack of positive energy. There could be no love. There could be no care, and there's no joy for her out of serving her husband. And perhaps she is not understood. So there's all these issues. We don't want to fall into the right and wrong trap when counseling. So the advice that I give people when they're considering therapy is that, Muslims often think that visiting a therapist is like going to, a medical doctor for an issue, get a prescription, okay, take that, you're going to feel better, kind of a quick fix, the therapist is going to tell you what to do, and when you do that thing that the therapist tells you to do, then everything's going to be perfect. But what happens when you seek marriage therapy and when you seek any therapy, the therapist, if they're a good therapist, they're going to educate them and encourage introspection, awareness, and encourage work that they have to do to improve their situation. So this is a lot of personal responsibility. It's a lot of, I'm not saying that there's any kind of miracle things going to be taking place. Taking steps, guiding them to self-awareness and himma, which is a courage to change. They need to vent, but they also need to work to change the things that are causing them problems. Sometimes a situation will come to a Muslim therapist for marriage counseling, and it'll be like trying to play soccer in rain. You want to run forward with the ball and you're slipping as many steps as you're taking. You can't get the momentum up, and you just make a mess, and there isn't a lot of progress. This is what happens when, a husband or a wife is very rigid, assertive, saying that there is absolutely nothing wrong with them, but the husband or the wife, they come in for therapy. So the one that's actively seeking the therapy, they want to fix their marriage. But in this case, the therapist is limited because they have all the qualities of an unsuccessful marriage, and yet the person who's trying is expecting success without changing the environmental conditions. And this has to do with, the husband and the wife both being active participants and both wanting to save and encourage them to have a good marriage. So are you seeking out marriage therapy on your own? Are you a husband or a wife that is actually actively seeking out therapy just for yourself, for your marriage? As I explained in the previous video about this, that if you've got one partner that is not participating and the other partner is participating, you may still get some help from a therapist, but the therapist can only really help you cope with the situation, help you decide whether or not you're going to stay or not in the marriage, and possibly increase the potential of marriage depending on how much you're willing to overlook and how much you're willing to accept from the other partner. This can mean accepting the marriage as it is or working with it and looking at the benefits versus the harms. Perhaps you will take a marriage course or you will see a marriage therapist and they will give you the advice that you may want to terminate the marriage because it just can't work and there's no success in it. And this is more so if the other partner refuses to be involved. So what does a marriage class look like for a Muslim couple? If there's going to be education offered to Muslim couples on how to, stay married and be happy in marriage, it's not going to be a fatwa or an advice session. It's not, the therapist is not a lawyer and they're not going to be doing legal arbitration, not dealing with custody or maintenance or any of those issues. Advice is part of the process, but it's not the only thing. Remember, the top goals of IBCT is communication and acceptance building. So it's an active process in which the husband and the wife both have to be active, and the therapist is also active as a guide and giving homework to the couple so that they can work together to improve their marriage.